Hi, I'm Richard, the founder of 10 Adventures, and this is the 10 Adventures podcast. Each week we talk to real people about real adventures as they explore this incredible planet we all live on. This week on the 10 Adventures podcast, we're talking all things Croatia. Joining me is my colleague Karen as we interview Vese Huljic, founder of the Croatian adventure travel tour company and Adventure. Hear about sailing the Croatian Isles, trekking, cycling, and just enjoying this wonderful part of Europe. Hi everybody, we're here today with Vese Huljic from And Adventure, and we're talking about Croatia. And Karen, I've always been fascinated by Croatia. I had a work colleague go there years ago, and he couldn't stop raving about the food, the culture, the area just being the islands, the Mediterranean, and he loved it. But how about you? Have you ever thought about going on a trip to Croatia?
Yeah, I too. I've heard a lot of great things about Croatia, and the thing that's piqued my interest the most is I've heard of people bike touring the islands of Croatia, so eventually I want to hear about that today.
Well, that's perfect. Hi, Vese, and let's start this off with what makes adventure travelers fall in love with Croatia, because it's something we hear again and again.
So many things. You just mentioned few, like starting from the food, the climate, the environment, the nature. I mean, we are a tiny little country offering so much diversity that it's hard not to fall in love with Croatia. Not to mention people who are very friendly and family-wise orientated, like once they meet you, you're like their family member. You're not a guest anymore. So they have this beautiful vibe, which in many places did get lost when you travel in Western world. So Croatia is like really great mix of West and the old traditions. Like we are Western country with, Western infrastructure, Western prices. Often also people ask if Croatia is expensive. Well, it's not cheap. But on the other hand, we still have that beautiful rural touch and traditional touch. And I believe that mix is what makes that magic.
So Croatia is well known for its islands that I was alluding to earlier. And I was wondering about the different ways people can explore those Mediterranean islands.
There are many options. Like Croatia, all in total, when they count all islets, reef, everything, has about 1,245 declared islands, so which makes it the second largest island area in the Mediterranean, which is also a good fact to know. Among all of these islands, about 50 islands are inhabited, while all the others are not. What makes these 50 islands, let's say, the most interesting for the tourist visits, because then you have on most of them infrastructure, hotels, ferries, and how to get there. But of course, if you want to really explore the islands and do it in the most flexible and independent way, I always advise sailing, because this is what gives you a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility. You don't necessarily depend on the accommodations, the infrastructure, where are you going to sleep. You don't depend on the ferry schedule. The only thing that you depend of is, of course, the weather forecast. But again, if the weather is not perfect on some days, which is not as often, there are still options. Even if you get stuck on an island for a day or two, there are plenty of things to see on that particular island, because every island offers a lot.
So what is a typical day for sailing? Like, it just seems exotic. People are used to going on these cruises with thousands of people, but on a sailboat, you're just there with your friends. But are they piloting the boats, and what do they do every day?
You have different options. Croatia has a huge charter business, to say so. And then if you do like a bareboat charter, if you have your own skipper license, you are welcome to choose one of the boats for a full week and then do your thing by yourself. You will get all the necessary maps, materials, easy to navigate if you know how to sail a boat. On the other hand, if you have never done it, if you just want to have a taste of it, if you are not sure if you like a full week on board, then maybe one of our short sailing trips that are fully catered with skippers and even on some boats with 2 crew members would be a good choice, because it gives you a nice feel of maybe 2 days, 3 days, or 5 days on board. So you would actually feel if this is something you like or it's something that you would pass in the future.
So how big are the boats? How many people would be on them typically?
Depends. Like, we have variety of boats. Like, the sizes nowadays, the big boat was about 40 feet. That was like a yacht, right? Today, 40 feet is one of the smallest boats. So in our fleet, what we have, it starts from 42 feet up to 50 in terms of sailing yachts. We have also catamaran, which is 57 feet long. In many other charters, those boats even go to above those lengths. So you can even get a catamaran, which is about 60 feet. You can get a sailing boat, which is about 55 feet. So plenty of space and different layouts, because, it really depends. Some are more luxurious. So even on a 50 feet boat, you will have accommodations for maybe 6 people, while in charter version on the same length of the boat, you might even sleep with 10 or 12 people. So there are different layouts on same lengths. And of course, that reflects on the cost.
So it's small groups that are doing sailing then, for the most part.
So when you do sailing on sailing yachts or on catamarans, as we do it here, and chartering, what I just mentioned, it's either a couple or a family or a group of friends. So it's rarely, although it does happen, and there are some providers offering it, that we mix different people departing on the same day on a sailing yacht. We rather try to keep it private, because that way it offers you the maximum flexibility, the maximum feel. You can decide together with your skipper about the itinerary, about how much time would you like to spend swimming, which places would you like to visit. While, on example, if we did something organized with different people forming one single group, let's say 4 to 8 people, depending on the boat size, then we have to stick to one single originally planned itinerary without much flexibility, which is still great, which is still fun, but it still offers slightly different feeling than when it's completely private.
Less personalized, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
Which are the popular areas to sail in Croatia?
All over Croatia is beautiful, whichever region you choose from north to south. But coming from Dalmatia and living in Dalmatia, I would definitely always say Dalmatia is the hotspot, because of several most popular islands that are in the area, like Hvar Island, Korčula, which is also in the area, Vese, which is gaining more and more popularity. Like an example, the last edition of Mamma Mia musical was filmed on Vese, not in Greece. So that's also like an interesting fact. So these places are really like magnets for people visiting Croatia, and definitely places which they want to check the box that they visited when they came here. So sailing out from Split offers you accessibility to those places. But besides those popular islands, there is another national park, which I personally love, which is amazing to explore by sailing or even by sea kayak if you are a little bit more adventurous and don't mind maybe wild camping or combining sailing and kayaking. That would be Kornati National Park, which is further up north from Split towards Zadar, if you compare that to the coastline, right? So it's a beautiful archipelago of untouched nature, of 90-ish islands and islets and reefs, almost uninhabited. There are like several tiny settlements, but there are almost no people living there throughout the year. And it's definitely worth visiting.
Is that archipelago, is it accessible only by boat, or are there ferries that go to those islands?
Archipelago of Karnat is basically just accessible by boat. There are no official ferries. You can either jump on an excursion boat or maybe get a private speedboat to take you around for a day or so. But boats are the ones that make it accessible. Yeah.
So, what would a typical day on a sailboat in the Dalmatian Islands look like? What would people tend to do while they're out on a sailboat?
Well, it does depend a little bit on your personal preferences, but what most people do is like, you sail out in the morning. At some point, you stop in one of the bays along the route for a nice swimming, relaxing, maybe even having a lunch, because I must say that you can't imagine places on the coastline and on the islands where you can find really great restaurants. It might be tucked away from any settlement, away from the town, away from the busy parts, but in the middle of nowhere, you can run into a bay full of boats because of a restaurant which is super popular. So people often combine that, so they maybe go to a quiet place for a swim, or even have a swim in that same bay where they decided to have lunch, relax for a while, continue sailing towards their next destination where they decided to spend the overnight. So in terms of overnights, it can be either in marina, it can be in a port, it can be even in tucked away bay if they prefer that and if weather conditions allow it. There are really options, but it's all about relaxing, having an easygoing pace, swimming, enjoying the sun if the weather permits. Most of the days it does, and having great food. And if you're traveling with your family, enjoying their company because you're there on your boat on a limited space, to say so, which has its advantages but also some challenges, which which makes it more fun.
Tell us about some of the food that is popular in those islands.
Dalmatia is very Mediterranean type of food. Often people even compare it to Italian food. So you would often encounter lots of pasta in restaurants. You will encounter lots of different risottos, fish most of the time prepared on grill, barbecued meat, for people who love to eat meat, a lot of vegetables, a lot of great wine, and a lot of olive oil. And of course, what's one thing that you can't avoid in most of the places as an appetizer is cheese and Dalmatian prosciutto, which is Dalmatian ham dried on really on the wind, which is called bura, to say so. So it's a process of air dried nurturing of prosciutto.
I'm getting hungry now. Now, I told you one of the things I wanted to ask you about was cycling on those islands, because I've heard a lot of people talk about that, and I was wondering what you could tell me about cycling the islands.
There are many options, like either you are just a recreational cyclist or you're an avid mountain biker. There is something for everybody. What I do need to warn everyone is we are not in Holland, so it's not flat, it's quite hilly. So it's not just islands, it's the entire coastline and pretty much most of Croatia except the eastern part. We are hilly country. So you can expect a lots of rolling hills, a lots of climbs. In the summertime, even mixed a little bit with the heat. So we always encourage people to start early in the morning with their activity to avoid the heat of the midday. Options are different. If you are a road cyclist, there are great options even for self-guided tours. You don't necessarily have to join a group. If you're not comfortable traveling in a self-guided way, then there are organized trips that you can join a local guide and do a group tour. If you're a mountain biker, same rules apply, either a self-guided or guided mountain biking trip. So it's really wide and offers a lot. In terms of terrains, besides being hilly, if we talk about the mountain biking part, you can expect a lots of rocky trails, which is different. So we normally don't have lush forests with the soil. We have a lots of gravel. We have a lots of rocks. So it's slightly different technique of riding on those terrains, but still fun.
I have a question about road biking, and I'm interested in the road types. Europe is famous for having lots of kind of tertiary roads that are, almost no traffic going along beautiful views. Is it like that in Croatia as well, that you can ride without having to worry about cars and buses buzzing by you every second?
Not really, because we don't have a cycling infrastructure built for cyclists yet. Often you will ride on roads together with vehicles without even having a bike lane available. But the good side, if you're riding on the islands, is the fact that there is really not too much of heavy, dense traffic. Okay, so you will see cars, the cars will be passing, some of them will be slower, some of them will be faster because it's all up to the driver and their culture, right? But it's not as dense, it's far from something that you are used seeing on the mainland or maybe seeing in the big cities or maybe where you live. The other good thing is that when we program those trips, when we build those trips, we always try to use as much as possible some type of side roads, which are even less busy than the main roads would be. So we would use those main roads only when we have to and if we have to. So we really try to compensate as much as we can for the fact that you're not riding in a bike lane because there is no bike lane available.
And are there other areas besides the islands where people like to cycle in Croatia?
I'm always talking from the perspective of Dalmatia because this is my home and this is the area I like to promote most. But of course, there are other regions in Croatia. Istria, an example, is a second region, also popular as Dalmatia, offering amazing cycling trails. Their infrastructure might be even slightly better in some points, but it's not a huge difference. Also, in terms of food, Istria is a place to visit. They have completely different food than Dalmatia does. So again, high recommendations if you're a foodie. Again, another area in Croatia which is still developing. So they're off the beaten track, to say so, and they're like a new emerging regions, is definitely the northern Croatia and the northern east Croatia, like Slavonia and Baranja. Less hilly, but still there are some hills. It's not super flat, but way flatter than it is in south. Many of the bike trails that are interconnecting countries, like I don't know if you've heard of Eurovelo biking roads. So these are the European cycling routes connecting different countries. So many of those routes are even passing through the northern Croatia, like connecting maybe Slovenia and Hungary and Croatia through different routes. This is definitely something to look at and to try to maybe to visit. The only downside is it's not as popular yet, and that also brings the issue with the proper tourist infrastructure, because what we are used down in the south are like different hotels, different categories, different self-catering apartments, and lots of everything, right? Whilst when you travel to the northern Croatia, everything is more simple, although there are 4-star hotels, there are 3-star hotels, but it's less in numbers, there are smaller room numbers, and less capacity than what we are used on having here. So that's the main difference. Again, food, completely different from what you find in the South Croatia and in Istria. So something new to explore and to learn from.
I'm also really interested in walking holidays, and I can just imagine, being on the coast and with the hilly terrain, it must be beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit about walking in Croatia?
Similar rules apply, to say so, as what I mentioned to cycling. So a lot of hills. But of course, being a hiker, you are not dependent on the roads. So we go away on different hiking paths. Most of those paths nowadays are marked. I might say many are easy to follow, while for some others not so much, because even they're marked, they're maybe not maintained, so maybe they get overgrown by shrub and then bushes. On the islands, again, a lots of gravels, a lots of rocky trails, lots of walks through different olive fields, climbing up to the top of the islands, having spectacular views, which is like 360 degrees all over a panoramic view where you can see surrounding islands. I mean, the highest island by itself is less than 800 meters altitude above the sea level. So it's not, we are not Himalaya, but we have other challenges, right? So we don't have freezing cold like you might encounter in Himalaya, but we can have quite high temperatures in summertime, which again, if you are having enough of water and if you are starting early, you're good with most of the trails. And this is where even following the advice of locals and following the advice of your guide, telling you what might be a good hike for a certain hot day, which is maybe more protected, more shaded, what is the best time to depart, if maybe some hike might be better to be done in the sunset time, just before the sunset, so you're back in the city as the sun falls down, if it's not something too technically demanding and not too long. That might also work for some options. Varieties are really wide, and most of them are beautiful because not just the nature, often you will encounter like abandoned old stone traditional villages with the traditional architecture where you can also have a feel of that traditional historical life of Croatia. So something which is far from the modern stay in your posh, nice hotel. It's something that amazes people and surprises them when they start discovering different layers of Croatia.
What are some of the must-do routes for hiking in Croatia?
Honestly, it could be all year round, but unfortunately, due of the tradition and how Croatia developed as touristy destination, we are still known as the summer destination. And people are usually visiting us in the summer holidays, especially Europeans, when the kids have their school holidays, they would be here in July and August. Most of other visitors are traveling to Croatia starting from April until November. And if you are not dependent on really spending all day just on the beach and not really interested in anything else, if you would like to explore Croatia, if you would like to do hiking, if you would like to do some mountain biking, even sailing, then the time window from April to November offers you a lot. And when I say a year-round destination, even today, like it's just beginning of March and the entire last week was beautiful weather here in Split. Like we had temperatures, which I mentioned to Karen, around 16 to 18 Celsius during the daytime in the midday, sunny, amazing weather for exploring nature, amazing weather for hiking. It's just perfect. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. It's just, the nature just started to bloom and it's amazing, right? And we were just visiting, my team and myself this weekend, Krka National Park, because, we haven't seen each other for a while due to the COVID. We are working remotely from our homes. And we said, come on, it would be really nice to do some kind of field trip all together. So we got to Krka National Park and it was beautiful. I fell in love with it again and again and again, because when you visit it in the summer, during the normal season, it's packed. It's full of people. You really can't fully experience the nature and the beauty of the natural park, right? And now it was just like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. I just forgot how amazing this place is. Right? I didn't want to leave, so they had to send me away in the car because it was getting late. So, I'm just telling you that to point out that you can really visit Croatia anytime in the year. Like even in the winter, like the Christmas markets, like the one in Zagreb, which was getting popularity within Europe. But of course, due to COVID, it's on hold. But it was an amazing place to visit. And, even if you would travel in the wintertime, if it's snowy, to visit Plitvice National Park, you would experience it like something completely different, covered in white and snow and ice, which is not the typical image of that place. So there are options. It all depends what kind of traveler are you and what kind of experience are you seeking.
So we can't end this without talking about Game of Thrones. I know Game of Thrones was filmed partially in Croatia and Dubrovnik, I think. But where should Game of Thrones fanatics go to see, sets that were used in the show?
So the Game of Thrones was filmed both in Split and in Dubrovnik. So there are locations in both destinations where the sets were, where some scenes were filmed. It was actually amazing to follow how the industry developed after the Game of Thrones filming in Croatia. Like today, you have dedicated city guides who take you to a city tour with the Game of Thrones topic, right? And they're full of props. They have images of scenes from the serial, and then they take you to the real location and they show you which scene was filmed where, what was happening where. And for the Game of Thrones fans, it's definitely something, worth doing and worth visiting. I always remember some years back, I was guiding a sea kayaking trip. It was a group of US students who came on exchange to Croatia. And, I was talking about the nature. I was talking about everything, what marine life, everything. They were young students and they were not much into anything that I was mentioning. Like, yeah, it's interesting, but not their thing. And then at some point, like the view on a beautiful fortress just above Split outside of the city opened because it was a clear day. And then I was just like, and you see, this is Klis Fortress and this is, I wanted to say a few historical facts, and then I was just like, this was the scene where the Game of Thrones was filmed to where? Suddenly I got their attention. So this is when it really caught me how huge influence the Game of Thrones has. So for all of the fans, please do visit us. There is plenty for you to see and places to visit. Our guides are ready to show you around.
So other than Game of Thrones, what surprises travelers on their first trip to Croatia?
A lot of things, but I would say that they get surprised often by the fact how history, tradition, historical monuments are part of our daily life. Like we are living within those monuments. You don't have to sit in a car and drive for I don't know how many hours to see a castle. Like maybe some people are used if they used to travel to UK or to Scotland or to something. They really get surprised by the fact that, for example, in Split, there are still people living in Diocletian's palace, which is 1,700 years old. You still have apartments where people live within the city walls, which are that old. It's a part of the living city. It's not just a monument. It's UNESCO protected. It's a place you have to see once you're there, and it's definitely worth doing a guided trip so you would, learn more and get in depth of the place. But it's part of our soul. It's part of our daily life. And this is something that often surprises them. And if they're traveling, if not just to one region, like the second thing, if they're traveling to more regions, often they get surprised how different those regions are. So this is something that is easy to notice even by a foreigner. These are not like miniature differences between Istria and Dalmatia, or maybe inland Croatia and the coastal Croatia. These are like really big differences in terms of daily routines, in terms of gastronomy, type of wines which are preferred, the taste of wines, the strength of wines, if we talk about food, and many other details that are intervened in those uniqueness of each place.
Sounds wonderful and exciting. I'm wondering if I have to plan a trip there soon once this pandemic's over.
I don't know. What are you waiting for?
I was actually thinking the same thing, just the idea. I have a young family and imagining them, on a sailing trip and exploring different beaches and hills and all the history. It must just be super magical that once this pandemic is over, instead of going to, the traditional parts of the Mediterranean, Croatia just sounds spectacular.
Well, maybe you don't have to wait for the pandemic to be over, if I may say so. Like, an example, in 2020, Croatia was at some point the only EU country which was accepting US travelers. So you were welcome in Croatia in 2020, and they were travelers from US visiting us. But you mentioned, well, most of them did spend their time on sailing boats or on yachts, depending on their budgets. They were having some kind of private experiences for themselves, but they had the best experiences ever because it wasn't crowded. Everything felt so private, you know? So yeah, maybe think about it.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all these great aspects about Croatia. We'll link to some of the tours you mentioned in the show notes. But if people have a question, how can they find you and ask you a question?
Well, they can find our website, andadventure.com, and they can find us on social media. We are on Facebook as And Adventure Holidays and also as And Adventure on Instagram. So we are following all those medias. We try to be as regular with posting as possible, but sometimes it's not the easiest task.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thanks. It was fantastic.
Yeah, okay. So Richard and Karen, thank you for inviting me. I'm always proud to represent Croatia and to share my knowledge about it. I could talk for hours, but I believe I'd give you enough information to start dreaming about your next visit.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. If you liked it, why not give us a review? Better yet, subscribe and get inspired again and again. Also, if you want to find your own adventures, why not check out 10adventures.com, where you can use our free resources to plan your own trip or book a tour in over 60 countries and make your own epic memories on your next adventure.